Let's compare rights and regulations between Ontario and Alberta's Landlord Tenancy Acts. Alberta is known to be more of a landlord-friendly province. Let's explore a bit to learn why that's the case. In Alberta, a fixed-term tenancy ends on the date specified in the residential tenancy agreement. For example, if a lease start date begins January 1st, 2023 and ends on December 31st, 2023, at the end of that term, the tenancy is ended and no notice has to be given by either the landlord or the tenant. Unless the landlord and tenant wish to renew and negotiate a new tenancy agreement, which could include a change in rent amount, as well as changes to any terms and conditions, the tenant must move out. However, if the landlord and tenant enter into a periodic tenancy, which has no finite end date, such as a year-to-year, a month-to-month, or a week-to-week, a landlord can only end a periodic tenancy for specific reasons similar to those in Ontario, and proper notice must be given. In Ontario, at the end of a lease term, the tenant does not have to move out, nor do they have to sign a new lease. The terms from the original lease agreement continue on a month-to-month basis. Tenants only have to vacate the property for specific reasons, like major renovations, if the landlord plans to use it for their own use, for the use of their spouse, their child, or parent, or when the property is sold and the new owner wants all or part of the property to be used by themselves or their immediate family member. Security deposits. In Alberta, landlords can collect a security or damage deposit that can be applied at the end of a lease term for any unpaid rent, legal fees, unpaid utilities, repairing or replacing physical damage to the premises, or to cover any cleaning costs because of abnormal or extraordinary use. The security deposit cannot exceed 1 month's rent. Also, it must be deposited into an interest-bearing trust account within 2 days from when it's collected, and any unused portion of that deposit is to be returned to the tenant with interest generated. Any of the deductions to the deposit must be made in writing to the tenant with receipts provided. In Ontario, no security or damage deposit may be collected, so if your tenants move out and there is damage to your unit, good luck collecting. Rent increases. In Alberta, there is no limit on the amount by which the landlord may raise the rent.
What you talking about, mister?
A minimum of 365 days or 1 full year must have passed since the last rent increase and cannot occur at any point during the fixed term. For example, you sign a 1-year fixed lease. At the end of that term, you can then sign a new lease with new terms at a higher rent with no notice. Or you can also have a fixed term lease that transitions to a periodic tenancy. You can negotiate your rent increase with no limit, but appropriate notice must be given and the higher rent must still be 365 days from that last increase or from the lease inception date. In Ontario, the legal rent increase guidelines for 2023 is 2.5%. 90 days notice is required, and similarly, a minimum of 365 days must have passed since the lease start date or the last increase. Evictions and termination. Reasons for termination in Alberta could be non-payment of rent when due, interfering with rights of other tenants or the landlord, having unauthorized occupants living in the rental premises, and refusing to leave when the lease term expires. If a tenant commits a substantial breach of the residential tenancy agreement, specifically related to non-payment of rent, the landlord gives the tenant a 14-day notice to end the tenancy, and the tenant cannot object to this notice, with the only solution being to pay the rent owed in full. Even more seriously, a landlord can even serve a tenant with only a 24 hours termination notice if there's significant damage to the property or physical assault or threats have been made to the landlord or to another tenant. If a tenant disputes a termination notice and does not vacate, the landlord can apply to the Residential Tenancy Dispute Resolution Service for an order of recovery and possession. Current wait times are approximately 7 weeks or so. If the tenant still does not vacate after the court order is issued, then a landlord can hire a civil enforcement agency, which hires a bailiff to evict the tenant. As for out-of-pocket costs and timelines, I can't really say how long this whole process lasts. In Ontario, there's different timelines for different breaches to the tenancy agreement. For non-payment of rent in Ontario, the landlord will serve a notice to the tenant, which gives them 14 days to pay the rent owed in full. On the 15th day, if the rent is not paid, you can file an application with the LTB to schedule a hearing. The current wait times for the initial hearing at the LTB due to the backlogs is about 6 to 8 months.
Wow!
If the tenant does not vacate by the date issued on the court order, then the order can be filed with the court enforcement office to be enforced. An order for payment of money can be filed with the small claims court for enforcement of out-of-pocket expenses and unpaid rent. So you have just a few important differences here between the two provinces when comparing the rights and responsibilities of their respective residential tenancy acts.